Well, at the time I wrote Somewhere in Time. Actually, it wasn't called Somewhere in Time. The original title was Bid Time Return, from a Shakespearean quote. My wife and children and I were on a camping trip, and we stopped in Virginia City. In the Opera House there, I saw a photograph of Maude Adams, a famous American actress. And it was such a great photograph that creatively I fell in love with her. And I thought, well, what if some guy did the same thing and could go back in time to see her? I sold it right away. It didn't do that well. Steve and Simon, and now Stephen Deutsch at that time, fell in love with it.
I went into a bookstore and picked up a copy of this wonderful book called Bid Time Return, written by this man that I'd heard of, Richard Matheson, who'd written The Incredible Shrinking Man and other things. And I read this book and I was just enchanted. And something clicked inside of me and said, okay, I gotta make this book. So Richard and I had our first meeting in February or March of 1976, and we made a pact at that point that we would make the movie together. It took 3 years, from that point forward until the time that we could actually do it. And then in 1978, my boss, Ray Stark, called me and said, there's this director named Jeannot Swark who just did Jaws 2 for Universal. We should figure out something to do with him.
Just before Jaws 2 was released, I suddenly got a call from Ray Stark, and he wanted a meeting, so I went to see him. And he said, we have a book here by Richard Matheson called Bid Time Return, but nobody seems to really understand it. And I said, well, I'd like to read it. So I read it that night, and I called Steve the next day, and I said, this is it. I had an instant affinity for it.
My problem after Superman was that I was offered many action hero roles, and that didn't really appeal to me. Somebody seriously asked me to play Eric the Red, the Viking. I could just see myself with a silver cup with horns on my head. But action-adventure wasn't really what I was looking for. I was looking for something very quiet, something very different. And I was just struck by this very simple love story that had the unique aspect of time travel. And I thought, as long as we can make it believable about how the character goes back in time, as long as that doesn't seem to be too strange or unbelievable, then I think the movie would work really well. That was my only reservation. I waited a little while. You know, thinking about that, thinking if I could make that believable. And then I decided we should just go for it, you know, that the notion of it was so magical that it would work.
I became obsessed with this movie. I read it and I went, oh my gosh, this is the one. It sang to me. It inhabited me, and it was the first time in my life that I just went, this isn't about wanting something. This is about being this character. This is someone I know. I have to do this. I went in to meet them, and Christopher Reeve was there. And Chris was talking to me, and I think we talked about silly things like British royal family or something. I don't know what the subject was.
I'll never forget this. They sat together, and they were not doing a scene or anything. They were just talking and chatting, and there was immediately this chemistry between them, and together they just looked like a real couple, and that was it. Matheson originally set the novel in the Coronado Hotel in San Diego, and I knew the hotel, and it didn't work. There were problems with TV antennas and things we were not supposed to show. And then we started thinking about alternatives. And Steve Bickel was the associate producer, came in one day and he brought a book, and in the book there was a photograph of the Grand Hotel in Mackinac Island. I just fell in love with it immediately.
There was a sort of faded grandeur about the place, and the hotel itself had a feeling of being very much alive over the centuries. It sort of kind of winked at you as if, you know, I've been around longer than any of them of my guests. It contributed hugely to that feeling of going back in time, and did indeed become a character in the movie.
Of course, when we made the movie, we did get to stay at the hotel. We stayed down in dormitories on another part of the island. And we all got around on bicycles because there's no cars allowed on the island. So everybody in the movie had a bicycle with a number on it.
We had to do some hard negotiating, but eventually we got permission to have one vehicle for equipment, and that was that. And all the rest of us went to work either by foot, on bicycles, or with horse and buggies. So it was very romantic.
Chris had his airplane there hidden. So when no one was looking, Chris and I used to sneak out in the middle of the night, like 3:30, 4 in the morning, get on our bicycles, go to the airplane, and take off. So we did. We flew to Toronto a couple of times, and they would have killed us if they'd known.
Just before I was to do Somewhere in Time, I was set to do a play, and I had to call the director of the play, Vivian Matalon, and he said, well, that's fine. I don't mind if you're not there for the first reading, but you must be there for the first rehearsal. And so as we were getting close to the time, and I was worried that we wouldn't get finished. Christopher could tell, and being a stage actor himself, he knew that I would be worried about it, so he came to me and said, don't worry about being finished if you're not finished in time. I personally will fly you there myself. And I was so touched by that. I thought it was so dear.
Since we were close together and we had our meals there, we had rooms to rehearse in when that was necessary. We had a nightclub that we could relax at night if we wanted to. And so it was really a family situation.
Jeannot had this whole thing planned out, and I was so nervous. And he did this angle and that, all these sort of step 2 steps here, step 2 steps there. It wasn't like two people come together, say the line, and they're together. It took all day. And finally, it got to the point where he was right up close to me, and I had the immortal line, "Is it you?" I was so nervous, I said, "Is it you?" Which came out, "Is a Jew," which is really an incongruous line. You know, at the time, nobody noticed, and nobody had the guts to tell me that that's what it sounded like, so it was looped. "Is it you?"
When I read the script and realized that he literally dies of a broken heart, I thought, uh-oh, here's where I may get in trouble. But by that time, the audience is so into the film, so the concept of him literally dying that way is plausible. But what is very curious is that in July of 1995, about 2 months after my accident, I had a very severe reaction to a drug, and it almost killed me. And in fact, I flatlined for 50 seconds. And I actually left my body. And the very same thing happened to me. I was up on the ceiling looking down at all the people working on me trying to bring me back. And fortunately, they tried a different approach and shot me with a massive dose of epinephrine. And suddenly I was back in my body, and all the noise and chaos returned, and I never thought that I would experience something like that ever. But it just made me think of the scene in Somewhere in Time, and we're not so far off.
When we finished making the movie, I asked Jeannot, "Who are you going to get for the music?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know, we've got to find someone really good, but budget-wise, we're not quite sure what we can get." And I suggested John Barry, and he looked at me in astonishment and said, "Are you crazy? We can't even afford to ask him. It's absurd. I mean, he's way too expensive." And I said, "Well, he's a very close friend of mine, and I'll give him a call." And Jeannot said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" So I called him up and I said, "John, you've got to do this movie. It's just the most amazing movie. It's a wonderful story. Read it, please. Just see." I said, "They can't afford you. They can't even afford to ask you. So this is just from me. Just see what you think." And he saw it and he just said, "I'll do it."
My father died in December, just before Christmas, and my mother died the following April. And Somewhere in Time was the first music I wrote after that. I don't usually write like that. I don't write and lay on dramas of my personal life. But that was probably the most shattering experience you can ever have with your mother and father die within several weeks of each other. And I think that probably had a lot to do with it.
We all thought that we could get away with a big, wide release with this movie, and et cetera, et cetera. And we all anticipated that. And the movie came out and pretty much got eviscerated by the critics.
I must say, it was not probably a very easy film to sell. It was difficult, it was special. But it was just thrown out there, and it didn't do well. And then I had gotten a phone call from someone called Jerry Harvey, who at that time was the head of programming for Z Channel in Los Angeles. And he had seen the picture at a screening, and he went berserk over it. And then he approached the studio and he put the film on Z Channel for a week, 2 weeks, and they got an enormous amount of mail.
And gradually people in LA started watching it. And then as cable spread across the country, and people found it and fell in love with it, and then of course video came along, and gradually it became a cult classic. But I have to say it was really rescued by cable.
When it suddenly became this cult classic, when it got onto videotape and just people were watching it and renting it and renting it and watching it on television, then everywhere I'd go, people would say, oh my God, Somewhere in Time, oh my God, that's my favorite movie ever.
We'd put so much into the film that it was hard to see it get trashed in the beginning. And incredibly gratifying that over the years our belief in it really turned out to be justified.
10 years later, I suddenly, out of the blue, got a phone call by this wonderful man named Bill Shepard, who had seen the film in a theater and was absolutely insane about it.
I thought, well, why not maybe get something formal organized? Why not start some kind of an organization? I came up with this acronym, INSITE, I-N-S-I-T-E, which stands for the International Network of Somewhere in Time Enthusiasts.
He approached the hotel. He started organizing a weekend every October at the hotel. There's a weekend where people come.
I feel very fortunate that in my career, I've been in a couple of movies that will always stand the test of time. And one of them is the first Superman film, and Somewhere in Time, which actually really is timeless.
Of all the movies I've ever made, this is the one that I will never forget the experience of making it or the pride of having made it.
I think just the fact that the film got made and that I spent those weeks with this extraordinary group of people in front and behind the camera. The film has become something which is beyond all of us who did it. It has a life of its own. And I had the honor and the privilege to be part of it. I think that's plenty for me.
He told me that one day I would meet a man who would change my life.
I thought I lost you.
Oh, never, 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 never.